What you see is what you get. She has said those exact words on camera, with eye contact, with the specific kind of sincerity that only someone who has spent a very long time practicing sincerity can actually produce. And for years, genuinely, years, her audience took that statement at face value. Because why wouldn't you? She cries real tears. She feels real feelings. She loves with what appears to be a real and open heart that she offers up to the camera again and again and again across multiple seasons, multiple relationships, multiple continents, and multiple heartbreaks that we watched unfold in real time. But a document has just surfaced, 47 pages, a table of contents, section headings, a named author, someone who worked directly inside the Darcey Silva world for an extended period of time. And the question this document is forcing onto the table, a question that her most loyal audience is going to find deeply uncomfortable, is this: what you see and what actually exists, are those the same thing? Because pages 1 through 22 are one conversation. Page 23 is an entirely different one, and we need to talk about it. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications, because this channel, the Tell All Tapes, is where we go beyond the edit, beyond the confessionals, beyond the carefully constructed moments that production wants you to see. We read the receipts, we track the patterns, and when something like this lands, we cover it fully and we cover it honestly. Like this video, subscribe. You are going to want to be here for what comes next. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Because to understand why this document matters as much as it does, you have to understand the specific kind of contract that Darcey Silva built with her audience and how long she spent building it. Darcey did not stumble into the public eye. She did not accidentally end up on 90 Day Fiancé in the way that some cast members seem genuinely surprised by the experience. She pursued this. She fought for screen time. She leveraged her initial appearance into a spin-off. She turned the spin-off into a platform. She turned the platform into a brand. And at every single stage of that process, the central selling point, the thing that made her compelling, the thing that made her watchable, the thing that separated her from the dozens of other cast members who came and went, was the idea that she was completely, unguardedly, almost recklessly real. The tears were real. The vulnerability was real. The heartbreak was real. The hope was real. That was the product. That was what people were subscribing to and showing up for every single week. Not the drama in the abstract, the specific drama of a specific woman who was allegedly showing you every corner of herself without apology and without a filter. And here is where the trap was constructed. And I want you to understand this because it is genuinely sophisticated, even if it was not consciously designed that way. Every time Darcey went on camera and said some version of, "This is really me, I am not hiding anything, what you see is what you get," every single time she said that, she was raising the stakes on her own authenticity. She was making a promise to her audience implicitly that accumulated over time. One confessional is just a moment. 50 confessionals across multiple seasons, all delivering the same core message. I am real, I am open, I am giving you all of me. That is a contract. And an audience that has emotionally invested in that contract does not respond neutrally when they find out that some rooms in the house were always kept locked. They do not feel surprised. They feel personally betrayed. And that distinction between surprised and personally betrayed is everything when it comes to understanding why this document is landing the way that it is landing. Let me tell you about the credibility problem this document creates, because it is a specific kind of problem that is very difficult to navigate publicly. This is not a tweet. It is not a blind item buried in a gossip site that can be dismissed as rumor. It is not an anonymous source whispering to a tabloid. It is a 47-page formatted document with a table of contents, section headings, sourced claims, and a named author who attached their real identity to every word of it. That structural specificity changes the nature of what it is entirely. When something is vague, you can respond to it vaguely. You can say it is drama, you can say people are jealous, you can say you are not going to give that energy any of your time, and a certain percentage of your audience will accept that because the accusation itself is hazy enough that the denial feels sufficient. But you cannot respond to a table of contents with a vague statement about your peace of mind. You cannot respond to section headings with a live stream about protecting your energy. The document is specific. A response, to be credible, also has to be specific. And that specificity requirement creates what I can only describe as a genuine double bind. Because to dispute this document specifically, you have to engage with it specifically. You have to point to individual claims and explain why they are wrong. You have to address pages and paragraphs and quoted conversations. And in doing that, in choosing which specific claims to dispute, you inevitably tell us something about the claims you are not disputing. Every attorney in the world will tell you the same thing. A partial denial is, in the eyes of public perception, a partial admission. If you dispute 12 of the 47 pages in detail, what does your silence on the remaining 35 tell us? There is no clean way out of that corner. Either you address all of it, which is an enormous undertaking that keeps the document alive in the conversation for as long as the rebuttal takes to produce, or you address part of it and invite scrutiny on the parts you did not touch. Or you address none of it and let the document stand unchallenged. Every option has significant consequences. And the person who authored this document, we will talk about who they are in a moment, understood that when they structured it this way. This was not assembled casually. It was assembled deliberately. Now I want to talk about the professional stakes here, because I think there is a tendency in the reality television commentary space to frame these situations purely as drama, as entertainment, as tea or content. And it is content. But what this document represents in professional terms goes considerably beyond the drama cycle that social media runs on. A 47-page sourced document with a named author is not a moment that lives and dies in a news cycle. A tweet lives for 3 days. A blind item lives for a week. An expose video on YouTube lives as long as the algorithm keeps surfacing it, and then it fades into the archive. But a formatted document, the kind that can be attached to an email, forwarded between professional contacts, filed, referenced, cited, has a different kind of longevity. It is sitting in my inbox right now. It will still be sitting in inboxes 6 months from now. It will come up in searches. It will be referenced in comment sections under future content. It will be something that journalists covering the space have in their files. And who receives documents like this? Networks do, brand partnerships teams do, casting directors do, producers developing new formats do. The people whose professional decisions shape what a television personality's next 5 years look like are exactly the people for whom a formatted, sourced, named author document is a relevant piece of information. That is the level at which this operates. That is why the professional stakes here are not just about the current audience cycle. They are genuinely generational in their potential impact on a career trajectory. Let me talk about page 23. Because the document has 47 pages, and I could spend a long time on the broader picture that it paints, but I want to be precise about what sources are describing as the specific pivot point of this entire account. Pages 1 through 22 establish context. They establish the professional relationship between the author and the subject. They document the environment, the culture, the day-to-day reality of what it was like to work inside the orbit of this particular public personality. That section is honestly a mixed picture. There are moments in those pages that are not unflattering, that show a more human and even sympathetic version of events. The author is not simply attacking from page 1. They are building a record. Page 23 is where the record becomes something significantly more serious. What the author describes on that page is a direct, first-hand account of a behind-the-scenes production meeting, a specific meeting with specific people present at a specific point in a specific filming cycle in which Darcey allegedly provided production staff with a version of events that differed materially from what she subsequently said on camera in the same episode. Not a small difference. Not the kind of minor inconsistency that comes from nervousness or misremembering or the perfectly understandable difficulty of keeping track of what you have and have not said during weeks of filming. A material difference. A difference in the account of what happened that goes to the core of the storyline that audiences watched play out. The document includes alleged direct quotes from people who were present in that meeting. It includes enough contextual detail, specific enough that anyone who was actually in that room would immediately recognize what moment is being described, so that this is not a vague or unverifiable claim. Either those quotes are accurate and that meeting happened the way the author describes it, or the author has constructed a false account detailed enough to expose themselves to very significant legal liability. And that is the thing about a named author on a document like this. They are not hiding. They are not anonymous. They attach their identity to these claims, which means they either have the receipts to back it up or they have made a catastrophic professional and legal miscalculation. Both of those things narrow the field of motivation considerably. People do not put their name on 47 pages about a former employer unless they believe deeply that what they are saying can withstand scrutiny, or unless something happened that made them angry enough not to care about the consequences. Neither of those possibilities is comfortable. I want to take a moment here and talk about the character study buried inside this situation, because I think it is genuinely the most interesting part of what this document reveals. Everyone has a private self. Everyone has a version of themselves that exists off camera, in private moments, in conversations that were never meant to be seen or heard or documented. That is not a scandal. That is just being human. The fact that the Darcey that exists in a production meeting might be different from the Darcey that appears in a confessional is not in itself surprising or damning. We all perform. We all calibrate how we present ourselves depending on context and audience and what we are trying to achieve in a given moment. But the document draws a specific distinction that I want you to sit with. It is not arguing that Darcey has a private self that is different from her public self. It is argued that in specific, consequential moments where the story being told had real stakes for real people, The gap between what she said privately and what she said publicly was not about shyness or protecting her family or the normal human desire to maintain some part of yourself that the camera does not own. It was about outcome management. It was about knowing, with a relatively sophisticated understanding of how these production situations work, what version of a story produces the result you want from the producers, from the edit, from the audience watching at home, and choosing that version deliberately and consistently. And there is a word for that. It is not authentic. It is the performance of authenticity. It is a strategy to wear authentic clothes. And the reason that distinction matters is that authenticity was not just one of Darcey's qualities. It was her entire value proposition. It was the thing she sold. It was what every "what you see is what you get" declaration was promising to the people who kept showing up. If that core claim is compromised in the way this document suggests, then the foundation of the entire public persona is compromised, not just a detail within it. Now I want to talk about what the response to this document is likely to look like. Because a response is coming, it has to come. The document is too specific and too widely circulated to ignore. And I want to give you a framework for evaluating whatever that response turns out to be, because I think the response itself is going to tell us as much as the document did. The response, whatever form it takes, is almost certainly going to be framed around pain. The pain of betrayal, the specific, visceral pain of someone who was inside your professional world, someone you trusted enough to let them see things that did not make the final cut, choosing to document those things and release them. And I want to be clear, that pain would be legitimate regardless of whether the content of the document is true. Having someone from your inner circle do this to you is genuinely awful. It would be awful if every word in those 47 pages was completely accurate. It would be awful if not a single word of it was. The experience of it happening to you is independently terrible. But here is what I need you to watch for in that response, whatever form it takes. Watch whether the response addresses the content of the document or only the existence of it. Those are two completely different things. Responding to the hurt of someone releasing a document, responding to the betrayal of the relationship, responding to the violation of having private moments made public, that is one response. Responding to what page 23 actually says happened in that production meeting, that is a different response. And if only one of those responses appears and not the other, that absence is as informative as anything the document itself contains. We have seen this particular move before in this space. The emotional response that is genuine and compelling and real, that makes the audience sympathize with the person being written about rather than the person doing the writing, and that completely, systematically, deliberately avoids engaging with the specific claims. The hurt becomes the headline, and the content of the document quietly stops being the conversation. Watch for that. Because if it happens here, you will know exactly what it means. There is one more thing in this document that I think deserves specific attention before we get to what happens next. And it is the detail that I find genuinely most revealing, not because it is the most dramatic, but because it is the most human. The author of this document was inside. They were trusted. They were present for filming moments that never made the edit. They have the kind of access that you only get when someone has decided you are safe, when someone has decided that you are part of the team in a meaningful way. That access is not given lightly in a production environment. It is earned over time. It is the result of someone deciding that you are not a risk, that they can be themselves around you in the spaces where the cameras are not running. And this person, with all of that access, with all of that proximity, with all of that trust that was apparently extended to them, decided at some point that documenting what they had seen was more important than protecting it. They made a calculation that writing those 47 pages and putting their name on them was worth whatever consequences came from that decision. That is not the action of someone who felt genuinely valued. That is not the action of someone who felt seen or respected or treated like a real person within the professional relationship. People who feel genuinely valued protect the people who valued them, even when the relationship ends badly, even when there is frustration or grievance or genuine hurt. You protect the people who made you feel like you mattered. You do not write 47 pages about them. This is someone who felt ultimately disposable. And that specific feeling of having been used rather than included, of having been kept close as a utility rather than as a person, tends to produce exactly this kind of response. The document is not just about what Darcey did in front of cameras. It is also, between every line, about what it felt like to be adjacent to that world without being genuinely part of it. And that dimension of the story says something significant about the professional environment that gets built around a public personality who has learned over time to prioritize the version of every story that produces the outcome she needs. We are going to be right back with the second half of this, and I promise you what comes in the final section of this document is not something I can summarize in a tease. It has to be walked through carefully, and it is going to reframe everything we just covered in a way that I genuinely did not anticipate when I first started reading this. Page 23 is the center of this story, but the last 10 pages are the conclusion that page 23 was building toward. And conclusions, once you understand them, have a way of making everything that came before them suddenly make perfect sense. Stay right there. Let me start with the concept of pattern, because it is the spine of everything the final section builds. A single incident is a moment. 2 incidents that look similar are a coincidence. 3 incidents that follow the same structure, involve the same choices, produce the same kind of outcome for the same person. That is a pattern. And patterns, unlike moments, are very difficult to explain away as misunderstanding or stress or the chaotic and imperfect way that human beings navigate difficult situations in real time. What the author does in the final section is go back through the specific incidents documented in pages 1 through 42 and demonstrate with a precision that is uncomfortable to read that each of them follows the same structural logic. A situation arises. There is a private moment where the real dynamics of that situation are visible and documented. Then there is a public version of that same situation, on camera, in a confessional, in a live stream, in a social media post, where the dynamics are presented differently. And the difference in every single case moves in the same direction. The public version always positions Darcey more favorably. The public version always assigns responsibility for difficulty outward rather than inward. The public version always preserves the core identity, the open, vulnerable, authentic woman who is simply trying to love and be loved, regardless of what the private version of events actually looked like. That is not a mistake repeated across several incidents. That is a consistent methodology applied across a career, and the author names it as such. They use the word methodology. They're not accusing Darcey of being occasionally inconsistent or sometimes self-serving, in the way that every human being alive is occasionally inconsistent or sometimes self-serving. They are describing a deliberate, repeatable process by which the narrative of any given situation is managed from the inside, with an understanding of what the final edited version of that situation needs to look like. That is a specific and serious accusation, and it is backed in those final pages with enough parallel examples that dismissing it as coincidence requires a significant act of intellectual generosity toward the subject. Now I want to talk about something that the final section raises that I have not seen discussed anywhere in the coverage of this document so far, and I think it is actually the most consequential thing in it. The author makes a specific claim about production, not about Darcey's relationship with her audience, not about her personal life, not about the emotional dynamics of her friendships or family relationships, about production, about the people who make the show. The claim is this: that production, at certain points across certain seasons, was aware of the gap between the private account and the public account and made editorial decisions that accommodated it rather than challenged it. That the version of Darcey that made it to air was not simply the result of editing out what was boring or unbroadcastable. It was, at least in certain documented instances, the result of an active, collaborative process between the subject and the production structure around her, in which certain things were kept out of the edit because both parties had reasons to keep them out. Read that slowly, because it matters. This is not the author claiming that Darcey lied to her audience. That claim was already on the table. This is the author claiming that the mechanism by which her audience received a curated version of reality was not just Darcey operating alone, it was Darcey operating within a system that, at key moments, had an interest in the same outcome she did. A show that centers on a cast member's emotional journey has a structural interest in that emotional journey remaining sympathetic and watchable. A cast member who understands that interest can leverage it, and according to those final pages, that leverage was used. Now, I want to be careful here, because this is an allegation in a document, not an established fact. But what I will say is this: if that allegation is accurate, even partially, it changes the conversation from being about one person's relationship with truth and becomes a conversation about the institutional structures of reality television production more broadly. It is no longer just a Darcey story. It becomes a story about how these shows work, who is actually in control of the narrative at any given moment, and how much of what we watch is the result of agreements, spoken or unspoken, between the people on camera and the people behind it. That is a significantly larger story than an expose about one cast member. And I think the author understood that. I think that is part of why those final pages read the way they do, not as the conclusion of a personal grievance, but as the opening argument in a much bigger conversation. Let me talk about the audience for a moment, because throughout this entire situation, the document, the response that is coming, the coverage, the comment sections lighting up across every platform, there is a group of people who are getting very little attention, and they are actually the most important people in this entire story. Darcey's actual viewers, the people who watched every season, the people who came back for the spinoff, the people who have followed the live streams and the social media posts and the merchandise launches and all of it. The people for whom Darcey Silva is not a talking point or a content topic, but a genuine source of entertainment, and even, for some of them, a genuine source of emotional connection, because her story of pursuing love and refusing to give up and surviving heartbreak and reinventing herself resonated with something real in their own lives. Those people are the ones who built this. They are the ones whose attention created the platform that made a 47-page document about Darcey Silva a significant cultural event rather than a private professional dispute. And those people are now in an incredibly uncomfortable position, which is the position of having to decide what to do with information that directly challenges the terms on which they made their investment. Because here is what actually happens when a public figure's authenticity is credibly challenged in the way this document challenges it. The audience does not just feel let down by the public figure. They feel embarrassed by themselves. They feel embarrassed for having believed, for having been moved, for having defended this person in comment sections and in conversations with people who were skeptical. The emotional exposure of having trusted someone who was allegedly managing your perception of them the entire time is not a small thing. It sits in a very uncomfortable place in the chest, and people respond to that discomfort in one of two ways. They either update their view, which is painful but honest, or they defend their investment, which protects the ego but requires a lot of intellectual flexibility around the new information. Watch what happens in the comment sections over the next few weeks. Watch how the audience splits and along what lines it splits. Because the audience response to this document is going to tell you as much about how parasocial investment works as the document itself tells you about Darcey. Both are worth studying carefully. I want to address something directly because I have seen it in the early comment sections and I want to be honest with you about it. Some people are going to say that covering this by making a video about this document, analyzing what it says, and taking it seriously as a piece of information is itself unfair, that it gives oxygen to something that might not be true, that the right thing to do is wait for the full story before saying anything. And I understand that impulse. I genuinely do. Nobody wants to participate in something that turns out to be unjust. But here is my position, and I want you to understand why I hold it. A document of this nature, circulating at this level, with this degree of specificity and a named author, is already part of the public conversation. It is in inboxes. It is in group chats. It is being referenced in comment sections on videos that have nothing to do with it. The choice is not between covering it and not covering it. That ship has sailed. The choice is between covering it carefully with appropriate acknowledgement of what is alleged versus what is established, or leaving the conversation to people who will cover it without that care. This channel exists to cover this space honestly. That means covering the things that are uncomfortable as well as the things that are fun. It means taking a named author document seriously as a document while being clear that allegations are allegations and not established facts. It means giving you the framework to evaluate what you are seeing rather than telling you what to conclude. That is what I have tried to do in this video, and it is what I will keep doing as this story develops, because it is not finished developing, not by a long distance. Let me bring it back to the core of what this entire situation is really about, because I think in the complexity of the document and the specific claims and the production allegations and all of it, it is easy to lose sight of the thing that is actually at stake here. The thing at stake is the terms of the contract between a reality television personality and the people who watch them. Reality television makes an implicit promise that it has never fully kept and has never fully broken. The promise is something like, you are seeing real people in real situations making real choices with real consequences. And that reality is what you are subscribing to. Every reality format makes that promise in some form. And every reality format edits, shapes, produces, and narratively manages what you actually see. The gap between the promise and the product is the fundamental unresolved tension of the entire genre. Everybody knows the gap exists. Nobody talks about it directly. The whole thing works because the audience agrees, through some collective and largely unconscious act, to accept a certain amount of construction in exchange for the emotional experience the format delivers. What Darcey did, if the document is accurate, was work that gap more aggressively than the implicit social contract allows. She did not just accept the normal editing and shaping that every reality cast member experiences. She allegedly participated actively in constructing the version of reality that the audience received, specifically in moments where that construction served her interests. She allegedly moved from being a subject of the production to being, in some sense, a co-author of it without her audience's knowledge or consent. And the audience's knowledge and consent matters, because they were not just watching, they were emotionally invested. They were feeling things in response to what they believed was real. They were carrying those feelings around with them between episodes, talking about them, relating to them, making them part of their own emotional lives. They were doing all of that based on a version of events that was allegedly more managed than they knew. That is the actual violation here, not the drama, not the production gossip, not even the specific incident on page 23, significant as it is. The actual violation is the use of genuine human emotional response, real empathy, real identification, real feeling as raw material in a construction project that the audience did not know they were participating in. So where does this go from here? Because I want to be honest with you about something. The most likely outcome of this situation in the short to medium term is that it gets managed. There will be a response. The response will be emotionally compelling. It will reframe the document as an act of betrayal by a disgruntled insider. It will generate sympathy. A portion of the audience, probably a significant portion, will accept that reframe and move on. The comment sections will stabilize, the algorithm will find something new to surface, the news cycle will rotate. That is almost certainly what happens. Because that is almost always what happens. The machinery of a public persona that has been built over years and across multiple platforms is not dismantled by a single document, no matter how carefully assembled. The infrastructure of loyalty, of parasocial connection, of genuine emotional investment that does not disappear overnight because of 47 pages. It bends, it absorbs, and in most cases, it recovers. But here is what does not go away. The document itself does not go away. It will exist permanently in the digital record of this space. Every future story about Darcey Silva will have it as potential context. Every future partnership negotiation will have it as a reference point. Every future audience member who discovers her work and decides to go searching will eventually find it. The narrative of the open book, the what you see is what you get woman, the one who cries real tears and loves with a real heart, that narrative has a permanent 47-page footnote now. And here's the thing about footnotes that most people underestimate. Footnotes have a tendency over time to become the most important part of the text. The main body of the story is what everyone sees first. The footnote is what the serious readers come back to. And the serious readers are always the ones who end up writing the next version of the story. That is where we are. Page 23 is not the end of something. It is the beginning of a much longer and much more significant reckoning, not just for Darcey Silva, but for the format that made her, the network that aired her, the production structure that shaped what you saw, and the genre as a whole that has been running on the goodwill of an audience it has been only partly honest with for decades. This document just pulled one thread, and some threads, once pulled, do not stop until the whole thing has come apart enough to see what was underneath it. We are going to keep covering this as it develops. I will be here when the response drops. I will be here when the comment sections start to tell us which way the audience is moving. I will be here when the next piece of this story emerges, because there will always be a next piece. There always is when something this structured is released into a space this engaged and this hungry for what is actually real. If this video gave you something to think about, if it reframed something you thought you already understood, if it gave you a framework that you did not have before you pressed play, then do something for me right now before you go anywhere. Hit the like button. It takes 2 seconds and it tells the algorithm that this kind of careful, honest, fully committed coverage of this space is what you want more of. Subscribe to the tell-all tapes and turn on your notifications, because this channel does not do half measures. When we cover something, we cover all of it. The document and the response, the narrative and the counter-narrative, the thing everyone is saying and the thing nobody wants to say out loud. Share this video. Specifically, share it with someone who has been following Darcey's story and thinks they already know everything there is to know. Because there are 47 pages that suggest otherwise, and page 23 is waiting for them. We read every page. We will be here for every chapter. The tell-all tapes. Subscribe. We are just getting started.